They dumped him on her doorstep like garbage. A man who once ruled the mountains, now broken, paralyzed, worthless in everyone's eyes but hers. Rhea Dalton stood at that labor auction with her last $7 and made the choice that would either save her dying ranch or bury it forever. While men twice her size bid on able bodies, she claimed the cripple. The one everyone laughed at. The one they said couldn't even hold a rifle anymore. But when Caleb Rourke's cold gray eyes met hers, something darker than desperation sparked between them. They had no idea what they'd unleashed. If you want to see how far this story reaches, drop a comment with your city below and hit that like button. Now let's begin. The auction yard stank of sweat, horse manure, and desperation. Rhea Dalton stood at the back of the crowd, her worn boots sinking slightly into mud that hadn't dried since the rains 2 weeks prior. January wind cut through her threadbare coat. The good one had been pawned 3 months back, and she kept her hands shoved deep in her pockets, fingers wrapped around the crumpled bills that represented everything she had left in this world. $7.43. Around her, ranchers and businessmen shouted numbers, their voices carrying across the muddy yard like the baying of dogs. The platform at the center held men in various states of defeat, drifters, debtors, those who'd gambled wrong or drunk too much, or simply run out of road. The reconstruction had been over for years, but its aftermath still churned out human wreckage, and the labor auctions had become a fact of life in territories where law was more suggestion than rule. $5 for the big one, someone yelled. 6. Rhea barely heard them. Her eyes scanned the line of men, looking for something she couldn't quite name. She needed help. That much was clear as the January sky. The Dalton Ranch was dying by inches, had been since Thomas took that fever last September and left her alone with 300 acres, 40 head of cattle, and debts that multiplied like rabbits. She wasn't looking for the strongest man. She couldn't afford him anyway. She was looking for the desperate one, the one nobody else wanted. Lot 17! The auctioneer, a rail-thin man named Sykes with a voice like gravel in a tin cup, gestured to someone being wheeled forward. The crowd's energy shifted immediately, from hungry interest to something uglier. Laughter rippled through the men nearest the platform. Rhea pushed forward, not caring whose ribs her elbows found. The wheelchair was crude, built from what looked like parts of a field cart, with wheels that didn't quite match, and a seat cobbled together from old leather and rope. The man sitting in it looked like he'd been carved from mountain stone and left out in the weather too long. Caleb Rourke. She recognized him, though she'd never spoken to him. Everyone in 3 counties knew about Caleb Rourke. He'd been a legend once, a trapper who could track a mouse across bare rock, who'd survived 2 winters alone in the high country, who'd killed a grizzly with nothing but a skinning knife when his rifle jammed. Men told stories about him in saloons, each tale more elaborate than the last. Then came the fall. A cliff gave way during a hunt, broke his back, left him paralyzed from the waist down. That was 8 months ago. Now he sat slumped in that makeshift chair, his dark hair hanging past his shoulders, beard untrimmed, clothes that might have been decent once but were now just rags held together by stubbornness. His hands rested on the armrests, and Rhea could see they were still powerful, scarred, calloused, the hands of a man who'd worked his whole life. But his legs were just dead weight beneath a blanket. Now, gentlemen, Sykes was saying, his voice dripping with mock courtesy, I know what you're thinking, but hear me out. This here's Caleb Rourke. Some of you might remember when he was worth something. He can still use his hands, still got his mind. Might be useful for detail work, mending, that sort of thing. What's the starting bid? Someone called out. $1? Laughter erupted. 50 cents and you keep the chair, another voice added. More laughter. Sykes shrugged. 50 cents it is. Anyone? Silence. Rhea watched Caleb's face. He wasn't looking at the crowd. His eyes were fixed on something in the middle distance, his jaw set, every line of his body radiating a fury so cold it seemed to drop the temperature another 10 degrees. This wasn't broken. This was molten rage wrapped in ice. Come on now, Sykes pressed. Surely someone... $7. The words came out of Rhea's mouth before she'd fully decided to speak them. Her voice wasn't loud, but in the sudden silence it carried like a gunshot. Every head turned. Sykes blinked. Ma'am? $7, Rhea repeated, louder now. She pulled the crumpled bills from her pocket and held them up. "That's my bid." The crowd parted as she walked forward. She could feel their eyes on her, could hear the whispers starting. Thomas Dalton's widow, poor thing. Lost her mind along with her husband. Pathetic. Let them whisper. She reached the platform and held out the money to Sykes. He stared at it like she was offering him a dead fish. "Ma'am, I appreciate the charity, but—" "It's not charity," Rhea cut him off. "It's a bid. You accepting it or not?" Sykes glanced at the crowd, then at Caleb, then back at Rhea. His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed. "Going once, going twice." He paused, clearly waiting for someone to object, to laugh, to make another bid just to humiliate her further. Nobody did. "Sold to Mrs. Dalton." Rhea climbed onto the platform and handed over the money. Her hands were steadier than they had any right to be. She took the handles of Caleb's wheelchair, rough wood that bit into her palms, and turned it around. That's when Caleb spoke for the first time. "Don't." His voice was a low rasp, like stones grinding together. Rhea stopped. "Don't what?" "Don't pretend this is anything other than what it is." He still wasn't looking at her. "You bought yourself a cripple because nobody else wanted him and you're too broke to afford better. Fine. But don't dress it up as kindness." Several people in the crowd snickered. Rhea leaned down, bringing her mouth close to his ear. When she spoke, her voice was quiet enough that only he could hear. "I'm not kind. And I didn't buy you because I'm charitable. I bought you because everyone else here is too stupid to see what you're worth. Now we can either sit here while they laugh themselves sick, or you can shut your mouth and let me get us both out of this cesspool. Your choice." She straightened up without waiting for an answer and pushed the wheelchair forward. The crowd parted again, but this time the laughter had died down to uncomfortable murmurs. The walk to her wagon felt like it took a year. Her wagon wasn't much. A flatbed with one wheel that wobbled and wood so weathered it was more gray than brown. The horse hitched to it, a mare named Bess, looked about as done with life as Rhea felt. She'd have to figure out how to get Caleb up onto the seat, and that chair would have to go in the back. And Jesus, she hadn't thought this through at all, had she? "There's a ramp." Rhea turned. Caleb was gesturing to the back of the wagon with one hand. "Fold down that board there. Angle's shallow enough I can pull myself up if you lock the wheels." She did as he said, her fingers numb from cold and nerves. The board folded down with a screech of rusty hinges. Caleb positioned his chair at the bottom, then gripped the wheels and started hauling himself up the incline. His arms shook with effort. His face went dark red. Veins stood out on his neck. But he didn't stop, didn't ask for help, just dragged himself and that chair up onto the wagon bed, inch by stubborn inch. When he reached the top, he was breathing hard. Sweat had broken out on his forehead despite the cold. "There's rope in the toolbox," he said between breaths. "Need to secure the chair or it'll roll when we hit a bump." Rhea found the rope and tied down the wheelchair while Caleb maneuvered himself into the driver's seat with the same grim determination. His legs were useless, but he swung them into position with his hands, arranging them like cargo. She climbed up beside him, took the reins, and clicked her tongue. Bess started forward with all the enthusiasm of a prisoner heading to the gallows. They were halfway out of town before Caleb spoke again. "Where are we going?" "My ranch. Dalton Place, about 8 miles northwest." "I know it." He was quiet for a moment. "Heard your husband died." "September." "Fever?" "Yes." Another pause. "How much land?" 300 acres, 40 head of cattle. Most of the fences are down. Barn's got a hole in the roof. House needs work." "How much money?" "What I just gave you was the last of it." Caleb made a sound that might have been a laugh if it had any humor in it. "So we're both broke and desperate. At least we're honest about it." Rhea didn't answer. The road stretched ahead of them, rutted and frozen, leading toward a future that looked just as uncertain. The ranch appeared on the horizon as the sun started its descent. Even from a distance, Rhea could see how bad it had gotten. The fence line sagged like an old man's spine. The barn leaned slightly to the left, its roof patched with boards that didn't match. The house itself looked tired, its paint long gone, shutters hanging at angles. Thomas had been a dreamer, not a carpenter. He'd had big plans for this place. Cattle empire, he'd said, finest herd in the territory. But dreams didn't fix fences or patch roofs, and when the fever took him, it took those dreams with it. Rhea pulled the wagon up to the house and set the brake. The sun was sinking fast now, turning the sky the color of a bruise. "There's a room off the kitchen," she said. "Used to be storage. I cleared it out. There's a bed. I'll need help getting inside." It wasn't a question, just a flat statement of fact. Rhea nodded and climbed down, then went around to help Caleb lower himself back into the wheelchair. The process was awkward and graceless, all sharp angles and muttered curses. By the time they finished, full dark had fallen. The house was cold. Rhea lit the lamps while Caleb wheeled himself through the rooms, his eyes taking in every detail. The kitchen was serviceable but sparse. A cast iron stove, a table with mismatched chairs, shelves that held more dust than food. The storage room she'd mentioned had a narrow bed and a window that looked out toward the barn. "This'll work," Caleb said finally. Rhea started a fire in the stove and put on coffee. Real coffee, not the chicory substitute some folks had taken to drinking. She'd saved it for special occasions, but tonight felt like it qualified. They sat at the kitchen table, the silence between them heavy with things neither wanted to say. Outside, wind rattled the shutters. "Why me?" Caleb asked finally. "Real reason." Rhea wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, feeling the warmth seep into her frozen fingers. "You want the truth? Wouldn't ask otherwise?" "Because everyone who bid on those strong men, they're going to work them until spring, then turn them loose when the hard season's over. They'll get their money's worth and then some. But you?" She met his eyes across the table. "You're smart enough to know that if this place fails, you've got nowhere to go. Nobody's going to take you in, so you'll fight for it like it's yours, because it might as well be." Caleb studied her for a long moment. Then he smiled, and it was the most dangerous smile Rhea had ever seen. "That's the first sensible thing anyone said to me in 8 months. We're going to lose everything if we can't turn this place around before spring," Rhea continued. "Bank's going to foreclose, but if we can get the herd healthy, get the fences up, show them we're viable, we've got a chance. A small one. I've worked with worse odds." Caleb leaned back in his chair. "What's the biggest problem right now?" "The north fence. It's completely down. Cattle are wandering onto Hale's land." "Victor Hale? You know him?" Caleb's expression darkened. "Everyone knows Hale. He's been buying up failing ranches for years, probably waiting for yours to collapse so he can add it to his collection. He's made offers," Rhea admitted, 3 times since Thomas died, each one lower than the last. "Because he knows you're desperate." Caleb drummed his fingers on the table. "That fence, how bad?" "Quarter-mile of posts rotted through, wires rusted. Would take 2 men a week to fix it properly." "Or 1 woman and 1 cripple 2 weeks." Rhea almost smiled. "You think you can help with fence work?" "I can't walk. I can still drive posts, string wire, work a hammer." He gestured toward the window. "That barn, you said there's a hole in the roof?" "Size of a dinner plate." "Water damage?" "Some." "Show me tomorrow. I'll need to see what we're working with." Caleb finished his coffee and set the cup down with a decisive click. "Here's how this works. You handle anything that requires walking or riding. I handle anything that requires hands and brain. We split decisions 50-50. Something needs doing and we disagree. We talk it through until one of us convinces the other. Deal?" Rhea extended her hand across the table. "Deal." His grip was iron. That night, Rhea lay in her bed upstairs and listened to the house settle around her. For the first time in months, the silence didn't feel quite so crushing. There was someone else breathing under this roof, someone else who had stakes in whether the morning sun found this place standing or fallen. It wasn't hope, exactly. Hope seemed too fragile a word for what she felt. It was more like the moment before a storm breaks, when the air gets heavy and electric, and you know something's about to change, for better or worse. She fell asleep thinking about fence posts and cattle and cold gray eyes that saw too much. Morning came hard and early. Rhea was up before dawn, stoking the fire and starting breakfast. She heard Caleb moving around in his room, heard the creak of the wheelchair, the sound of water being poured into a basin. When he emerged, his hair was tied back and his beard was trimmed shorter, revealing a face that was harder and more angular than she'd realized. "Coffee?" she offered. "Please." They ate in silence. Bread, eggs from the 3 chickens that were somehow still alive, butter that had seen better days. Outside, the sky was turning from black to gray. Start with the barn, Caleb suggested. The barn was worse than Rhea had let on. The hole in the roof had let in enough water to rot part of the loft floor. 2 of the stalls had collapsed. The whole structure groaned in the wind like it was considering giving up entirely. Caleb wheeled himself around the interior, stopping occasionally to test a board or peer up at the rafters. His hands moved constantly, touching, probing, assessing. "This support beam's cracked," he said finally, pointing to one of the main posts. "It's holding for now, but come spring when the snow melts and the weight shifts, it'll probably give. That'll bring down this whole section. Can we fix it? We'd need a new beam, 6 inches thick at least, 12 feet long, and a way to jack up the roof while we replace it." "How much would that cost?" Caleb gave her a look. "More than we have." Rhea leaned against a stall door and closed her eyes. Every problem led to 3 more problems, each one requiring money they didn't have or skills they didn't possess. "What about the fence?" she asked. "That we can do, probably." Caleb wheeled toward the door. "Show me." They spent the rest of the morning riding the fence line, Rhea on Bess, Caleb in a smaller cart he'd rigged up that the horse could pull. The damage was extensive. 1/4 mile of posts rotted at the base, wire sagging or snapped entirely, whole sections where cattle had pushed through. But as they went, Caleb started talking, pointing things out, explaining what could be salvaged and what needed replacing. He had a way of breaking big problems into smaller pieces, making the impossible seem merely difficult. "We'll need to scavenge," he said. "There's got to be abandoned homesteads around here, folks who gave up and left. Their fence posts are still standing, just waiting for someone with enough brass to take them." "That's stealing. That's survival. They're not using them anymore." Rhea considered this. Thomas would have been horrified, but Thomas was dead, and she was the one left holding a dying ranch and a pile of debts. "There's a place about 5 miles south," she said. "Henderson Place. They packed up and left last summer." "Perfect. We'll go tomorrow." That afternoon, they started on the smaller repairs, things that didn't require materials they didn't have. Caleb positioned himself in the barn and began sorting through the jumble of tools Thomas had accumulated. He set up a workspace at bench height, organized everything by type and size, threw out anything too rusted or broken to be useful. Rhea worked on clearing debris, hauling rotted boards out to a burn pile, sweeping years of accumulated dust and bird droppings. It was hard, mindless work, but it felt good to see visible progress. As the sun started to set, she found Caleb in his makeshift workshop, bent over something on the bench. "What's that?" He held up a device that looked like a clamp attached to an extended handle. "Fence post driver. I can operate it from the chair if you position the post. Saves time." "Did you just make that?" "Adapted it. Found most of the pieces in that junk pile. Just needed to be put together right." He set it aside and wiped his hands on a rag. "Tomorrow we ride for those posts. Day after, we start fixing fence. Week from now, we'll have that north section closed up. And then? Then we deal with whatever comes next." Rhea nodded slowly. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was more than she'd had yesterday. That night after dinner, they sat at the table again. Caleb had found a ledger in one of the drawers and was making notes, materials needed, work to be done, a rough timeline for the next month. "Tell me about Hale," he said without looking up from his writing. Rhea felt her jaw tighten. "What about him?" "You said he made offers. How'd he approach it?" "First time was a week after Thomas died. He rode up here himself, all polite condolences and sympathetic looks. Offered me half what the place is worth. Said it was more than fair considering the difficult circumstances." "And when you refused?" "He came back a month later. Offer was lower. Said the ranch was declining in value. Implied it would keep declining." "Third time?" "Sent his foreman instead. Man named Pike. Didn't bother with politeness that time. Just laid out numbers and said I'd be smart to take them while I still could." Caleb's pencil had stopped moving. "When was this?" 2 weeks ago." "And you think he's just going to wait patiently while we fix the place up?" Rhea met his eyes. "No, I don't think that at all." "Good." Caleb went back to his writing. "Means you're not naive. That'll help." "Help with what?" "Whatever he does next." The words hung in the air like smoke. The next morning, they set out for the Henderson place. The abandoned homestead sat on a low rise, its buildings gray and skeletal against the winter sky. The house had been stripped of anything valuable, windows, doors, even some of the floorboards, but the fences were still standing. Rhea pulled the wagon up close while Caleb surveyed the posts. "These'll work," he said. "Juniper. Last forever if they're not in direct ground contact. We'll need to pull about 20 of them." How? Caleb had already thought of that. He'd brought rope and a lever system he'd rigged up. Rhea did the digging while Caleb worked the lever, and together they wrenched posts out of frozen ground. It was brutal work. By noon, Rhea's hands were bleeding through her gloves and Caleb's face was gray with pain. But they had 15 posts in the wagon. They were loading the 16th when Rhea heard hoofbeats. 3 riders came over the ridge, moving at an easy lope. Even from a distance, she recognized the lead horse, a big sorrel gelding that belonged to Pike, Hale's foreman. "Company?" she said quietly. Caleb followed her gaze. His hands moved to the rifle he'd brought, which was propped against his wheelchair. "How friendly are they likely to be?" "Not very." Pike was a bull of a man, thick through the chest and shoulders, with a face that looked like it had lost arguments with several fists. The 2 men with him were younger, harder, the kind who got paid for causing trouble rather than preventing it. They reined up about 20 feet away. "Mrs. Dalton," Pike said, his voice carrying that false courtesy Rhea had learned to hate. "Didn't expect to find you out here." "Free country," Rhea replied, "last I checked." Sure, just wondering what you're doing on Henderson's land." "Henderson doesn't have land anymore. He abandoned it." "Funny thing about that." Pike shifted in his saddle. "Mr. Hale bought this property last month, paid the back taxes, acquired the deed. So technically, you're on his land, taking his fence posts." Rhea's stomach dropped. Of course Hale had bought it. He'd been buying up every failed ranch in the territory. "We didn't know," she said, keeping her voice level. "We'll put them back." "Well, now that's going to be a problem. See, Mr. Hale's not inclined to press charges this time, seeing as how you're a widow and all. But he can't just let people steal from him. Sets a bad precedent." "What do you want?" Caleb's voice cut through the conversation like a knife. Pike's eyes shifted to him, and something ugly flickered across his face. "Well, if it ain't Caleb Rourke. Heard you were still breathing. Surprised anyone bothered to keep you that way." Caleb didn't respond, just watched Pike with the same intensity he'd probably used watching prey in the mountains. "What do you want?" Rhea repeated. Pike smiled. "Mr. Hale's got a generous heart. He's willing to overlook this little misunderstanding. All you got to do is sign them papers he sent over, sell him the ranch, take his money, and everyone walks away happy." "No." "Mrs. Dalton, be reasonable. The answer is no. It was no last time. It'll be no next time. Now get off this land before I decide you're the one trespassing." One of the younger men laughed. "You gonna make us, lady? You and the cripple?" Rhea heard the click of Caleb's rifle being cocked. "3 of you," Caleb said calmly. "That sorrel Pike's riding will spook at gunfire. He's already twitching. Dump Pike on his ass. Leaves 2. I can't walk, but my aim's fine. Want to find out how fine." The tableau held for a long moment. Wind whistled through the bare posts. Pike's horse shifted nervously. Finally, Pike raised a hand. "Easy now. No need for trouble. We'll be going. But Mrs. Dalton, this kindness got limits. Next time Mr. Hale reaches out, I suggest you think real careful about your answer." They turned their horses and rode off at a walk that was meant to look unhurried, but wasn't quite slow enough to hide their relief. Rhea let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. That could have gone worse. Could have gone better, too. Caleb lowered the rifle. "They'll be back. And next time they won't talk first." "What do we do?" "Finish loading these posts, get back to your ranch, fix that fence." Caleb looked at her, his expression grim. "And get ready for war." They worked in silence after that, loading the last few posts, securing them with rope. The ride back to the Dalton ranch felt longer than it should have, every shadow a potential threat. Every bird taking flight a possible warning, but they made it back without incident. That night, after the posts were unloaded and the horse was fed and they'd eaten a cold dinner because neither of them had energy for cooking, Rhea sat on the porch and watched the stars come out. Caleb wheeled himself outside to join her. "You scared?" he asked. Rhea thought about lying, decided against it. "Yes." "Good. Fear keeps you sharp." He was quiet for a moment. "I knew men in the mountains who weren't afraid of anything. Most of them died stupid deaths. You think we can actually do this? Hold on to this place? Honestly? I don't know. Odds aren't good. Hale's got money, men, and time. We've got none of those. Caleb looked out at the dark fields. But I'll tell you what we do have. We've got nothing to lose. That makes us dangerous in a way Hale can't understand. Men like him, they're afraid of losing what they have. We're already at the bottom. Only direction we can go is up. Rhea found herself smiling despite everything. That's either wisdom or insanity. Usually both. They sat in companionable silence as the temperature dropped and the stars wheeled overhead. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. Closer by, cattle lowed in the darkness. Tomorrow they'd start on the fence. The day after, there'd be something else. And somewhere down the line, Hale would make his next move. But tonight, for just this moment, Rhea felt something she hadn't felt in months. She felt like maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone in this fight anymore. The fence posts went into frozen ground like nails into iron. Rhea swung the sledgehammer until her shoulders screamed and her hands went numb, but the damn things barely moved. Beside her, Caleb operated the post driver he'd built, using his upper body strength to force the mechanism down. The sound of metal on wood echoed across the empty fields, a rhythm of stubbornness against impossible odds. 3 days they'd been at it. 3 days of dawn to dusk labor that left them both too exhausted to speak over dinner. The north fence line crept toward completion, inch by brutal inch. That's 16, Caleb said, wiping sweat from his face despite the cold. 4 more, and we can start stringing wire. Rhea leaned on the sledgehammer, catching her breath. Her hands were a mess of blisters on top of blisters, some broken and weeping. She'd stopped wearing gloves on the second day because they just filled with blood anyway. You need to wrap those, Caleb said, nodding at her hands. Later. Now. Infection will lay you up for a week, and then where are we? He was right, damn him. Rhea pulled out the strips of cloth she'd been using as bandages and started wrapping her palms. The fabric stuck to the raw flesh, and she had to bite down on a curse. Let me see, Caleb said. She held out her hands. He examined them with the same careful attention he gave everything, his calloused fingers surprisingly gentle as he rewrapped the worst spots. You're tearing yourself apart, he said quietly. So are you. It was true. Caleb's arms were shaking from exertion, and she'd seen him massaging his shoulders when he thought she wasn't looking. The work was brutal on both of them, just in different ways. Yeah, well, Caleb released her hands. Difference is I'm used to it. You're a rancher's wife, not a laborer. Was a rancher's wife. Now I'm just a rancher, and ranchers do what needs doing. Something that might have been respect flickered across Caleb's face. Fair enough. Let's get these last 4 in before dark. They worked until the sun touched the horizon, then packed up the tools and headed back to the house. The ride was silent, except for the creak of the wagon and the steady clop of Bess's hooves. Rhea's whole body ached in ways she hadn't known were possible. The house appeared ahead of them, and something about it looked wrong. Rhea pulled up on the reins. Caleb? He'd already seen it. The front door was hanging open. They'd left it shut and latched. Could be wind, Rhea said, not believing it. Could be. Caleb reached for his rifle. Or it could be Pike came back while we were gone. They approached slowly. The yard was empty, no horses, no fresh tracks in the half-frozen mud. But the open door swung slightly in the breeze, and Rhea's stomach was a knot of ice. Stay behind me, she said. You stay behind me. I'm the one with the rifle. You can't walk. Don't need to walk to shoot. Caleb's voice had gone flat and cold. Just get me to the porch. Rhea maneuvered the wagon close enough that Caleb could transfer to his wheelchair. The ramp squeaked as he rolled down it. He positioned himself facing the door, rifle across his lap, and gestured for her to go inside. The interior was chaos. Furniture overturned, drawers pulled out and emptied, the kitchen table on its side. Flour scattered across the floor like snow. Her mother's china, the few pieces that had survived the trip west, smashed to powder. Rhea walked through the destruction, her boots crunching on broken porcelain. They'd torn through everything, ripped cushions open, smashed the lamp globes, even pulled up some of the floorboards. In her bedroom upstairs, they'd slashed the mattress and scattered her clothes. Thomas's watch, the one thing of his she'd kept, was gone from the bedside table. She stood in the wreckage and felt something crack open inside her chest. Not fear, not even anger exactly, something colder and harder than both. Caleb was in the doorway when she came back down. He'd wheeled himself inside, navigating the debris with practiced efficiency. "They take anything besides the watch?" he asked. "Don't think so. There wasn't much to take." Rhea righted a chair and sat down hard. "This was Hale." "Yeah." "Sending a message." "Yeah." They sat in the destroyed kitchen as darkness fell around them. Neither of them moved to light a lamp. The shadows seemed appropriate somehow. "What do we do?" Rhea finally asked. Caleb was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was soft and deadly. "We finish the fence. We fix up this place. We show them it didn't work. And when they come back, then we make sure they regret it." Something in his tone made Rhea look at him more closely. In the dim light, his face was all hard angles and darker intentions. This was the man who'd survived alone in the high country, who'd killed a grizzly with a knife, who'd built a reputation on being more dangerous than the things that hunted him. The fall hadn't broken that. It had just compressed it, made it denser, more concentrated. "You're talking about fighting them," she said. "I'm talking about surviving them. There's a difference." Caleb gestured at the wreckage around them. "They want you scared, want you to fold. Every day we don't fold is a day we win." Rhea thought about the destroyed china, her mother's dishes that had crossed half a continent in a covered wagon. Thought about Thomas's watch in Pike's pocket. Thought about $7 and a dying ranch and a man in a wheelchair who somehow seemed more dangerous than 3 armed riders. "All right," she said. "We don't fold." They spent the next hour cleaning up the worst of it. Rhea swept up the broken china and the spilled flour. Caleb righted furniture and rehung the door properly. It wasn't much, but by the time they finished, the house looked less like a battlefield and more like a home that had taken a beating but remained standing. That night they ate beans straight from the can because the kitchen was still too much of a mess for proper cooking. Caleb produced a bottle from somewhere. Whiskey that tasted like it had been filtered through old boots, but it burned going down and that was what mattered. "To not folding," Caleb said, raising the bottle. "To not folding," Rhea echoed, taking a swallow that made her eyes water. The next morning came too early and too cold. Frost had painted the windows white and Rhea's breath fogged in the bedroom. Downstairs, she found Caleb already up, coffee made, something cooking on the stove that smelled like salt pork and onions. "You cook?" she asked. "Had to learn. Wasn't anyone else to do it up in the mountains." He flipped whatever was in the pan. "Fence today?" "Fence today." They fell into the rhythm of it, measuring, digging, driving posts, stringing wire. The work was marginally easier now that they'd developed a system, but it was still brutal. By midday, Rhea's vision was swimming and her wrapped hands were soaked with blood and sweat. "Break," Caleb ordered. They sat in the wagon bed, passing a canteen of water back and forth. The sun was high and pale, providing light but no warmth. In the distance, Rhea could see their cattle scattered across the brown grass, looking half-starved and sorry. "We need to do something about the herd," she said. "After the fence. One thing at a time." "They're in bad shape. So are we. So's the barn. So's everything." Caleb took another drink. "We start trying to fix everything at once, we'll fail at all of it. Finish the fence. Then we can think about the cattle." It made sense, but Rhea hated it. Hated having to triage which disasters to address first. Hated that there were so many disasters to choose from. "Tell me something," Caleb said. "Your husband. Was he good to you?" The question caught her off guard. "What?" "Thomas. Was he decent?" Rhea considered the question, considered lying, decided she was too tired for lies. "He was kind, gentle, full of dreams that were bigger than his ability to make them real. He loved this place more than he loved me, I think. But he wasn't cruel, wasn't mean." "But you didn't love him." It wasn't a question. Rhea looked at her hands. "I respected him, cared for him. But no, I didn't love him the way wives are supposed to love husbands. He was a good man, just not my man. Does that make sense?" "Yeah." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "My wife left me after the fall, packed up and went back east, didn't even wait to see if I'd recover." "You were married?" 3 years. Met her in Denver. She was a shopkeeper's daughter. Thought marrying a trapper sounded romantic." He laughed without humor. Romance died pretty quick once she realized what it actually meant, but she stuck it out, right up until I couldn't walk anymore. Then she was gone inside a week. I'm sorry. Don't be. She made the smart choice. I was useless. Dead weight. Why tie yourself to a sinking ship? Rhea turned to look at him directly. You're not useless. I can't walk, Rhea. Can't ride. Can't do half the things that need doing on a ranch. Without you, I'd be... Without me, you'd figure it out. Same as you're figuring out everything else. She gestured at the fence line they were building. You think any of this would have happened without you? I'd still be sitting in that house, crying over broken china and waiting for the bank to come take the deed. You're the only reason we're fighting instead of folding. Caleb studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. All right, we're a team then. You're not just keeping me around out of pity, and I'm not just here because I've got nowhere else to go. Deal. They shook on it, and Rhea felt something shift between them. A foundation being laid. Not friendship exactly, and certainly not romance. They were both too broken and busy for that. But something solid. Something they could build on. The fence was finished 2 days later. They stood. Rhea stood, Caleb sat in his chair, and surveyed their work. A 1/4 mile of straight posts and tight wire, running from the property marker all the way to the creek. It wasn't pretty. Some of the posts were crooked and the wire had patches where they'd spliced it, but it was solid. It would hold. Not bad, Caleb said. Not bad, Rhea agreed. That night they allowed themselves a small celebration. Rhea cooked actual food, venison from a deer she'd shot the week before, potatoes, even biscuits made from the last of the flour. They ate until they were full, a novelty after days of rationing. What's next? Rhea asked as they cleaned up. Caleb had already been thinking about it. The cattle. They're malnourished and some of them look sick. We need to separate the healthy ones from the questionable ones, check for disease, supplement their feed. With what money? With no money. We can cut hay from the south field. It's overgrown anyway. Won't be quality feed, but it'll keep them from starving until spring grass comes in. That's 2 months away at least. Then we better get cutting. The work never ended. That was the thing about a ranch, about survival. You fixed one problem and 3 more appeared. But at least now they were making progress. At least the problems were getting smaller instead of bigger. A week passed. Then 2. They fell into a routine, work from dawn until their bodies gave out, eat, sleep, repeat. The cattle got separated and the sick ones treated as best they could manage. The hay got cut and stacked. Small repairs were made to the barn, to the house, to equipment that had been neglected. And every day, Rhea expected Hale's men to return. But they didn't come. It's been too quiet, she said one evening as they sat on the porch. The weather had turned slightly warmer, enough that being outside wasn't pure misery. I noticed. You think they're planning something? I think they're waiting to see if we collapse on our own. Why waste resources when winter might do their work for them? Caleb was whittling a piece of wood, his hands moving with unconscious skill. But yeah, they're planning something. How do we prepare for something when we don't know what it is? We make ourselves harder to kill, harder to scare, harder to break. He held up the piece he'd been working on, a whistle carved from a single piece of cedar. You ever shoot much? Rabbits, birds, that deer. I mean, at people. Rhea shook her head. You might need to, probably will need to, if I'm reading this situation right. Caleb set down the whistle and the knife. Tomorrow we practice. Not just shooting, but shooting under pressure. Shooting when you're scared. Shooting when someone's shooting back. How do we practice that? I've got some ideas. The next morning, Caleb set up a makeshift range behind the barn. He'd salvaged bottles and cans from the dump pile, arranged them at varying distances. But it wasn't just target practice. He made Rhea run before shooting, made her shoot from awkward positions, made her reload under time pressure. Again, he'd say when she missed. Faster. I'm going as fast as I can. Not fast enough. You think Pike's gonna wait while you get comfortable? Again. It was frustrating as hell. Rhea had thought she was a decent shot, but Caleb's standards were different. He wanted speed and accuracy under stress, and he pushed her until her hands shook and her breathing came ragged. Why are you being such a bastard about this? She finally snapped after missing a shot she should have made. Well, because being a bastard in practice means you stay alive when it matters. Caleb's voice was hard. You want me to go easy on you? Fine. But when Hale's men come and you freeze up because you've never shot under pressure, that's on you. Rhea wanted to argue, wanted to throw the rifle down and walk away, but he was right and they both knew it. Again, she said through gritted teeth. By the end of the week, she was hitting targets consistently, even when tired, even when Caleb yelled random commands to throw her off. It still wasn't perfect, but it was better. Good enough, maybe. Meanwhile, Caleb had been working on other preparations. He'd reinforced the barn doors with heavy timber, created sight lines around the property so they could see anyone approaching from any direction, built a cache of weapons, not just rifles but makeshift things, containers of kerosene that could become firebombs, caltrops made from bent nails, a tripwire system around the perimeter. You're building a fort, Rhea observed. I'm building a trap. There's a difference. What difference? A fort just keeps people out. A trap makes them regret coming in. The words should have scared her. Maybe they did, a little. But mostly they made her feel something else. Something like gratitude. Someone was finally taking the threat seriously. Someone was finally fighting back. 3 weeks after the fence went up, riders appeared on the horizon. Rhea spotted them from the porch where she'd been mending a harness. 6 of them, moving at a deliberate pace that wasn't quite aggressive but wasn't friendly either. Caleb, she called. He rolled out onto the porch, took one look, and nodded. Get your rifle. Don't point it at anyone unless I tell you to, but have it ready. Rhea retrieved her Winchester from inside and stood beside his chair, the rifle held loosely but obviously. Her heart was hammering, but her hands were steady. All that practice, paying off. The riders stopped about 30 feet from the porch. Pike was in the lead again, but this time Victor Hale himself was with them. Rhea had only seen him once before, at Thomas's funeral. He'd come to pay respects, he'd said. Looking at him now, she wondered if he'd just been sizing up the property. Hale was in his 50s, well-dressed in a way that looked out of place on a ranch. Everything about him was calculated. The expensive coat, the groomed mustache, the way he sat his horse like he was posing for a painting. Even his smile was calculated. Mrs. Dalton, he said, touching the brim of his hat. I apologize for the intrusion. I was riding past and thought I'd check on how you're managing. Managing fine, Rhea said. I'm glad to hear it. Though I must say, I'm surprised. Last time we spoke, the situation seemed quite dire. His eyes traveled over the property, the repaired fence, the stacked hay, the general air of occupation rather than abandonment. You've made remarkable progress. We've managed. So I see. With Mr. Rourke's help, I assume? Hale's gaze shifted to Caleb. I was sorry to hear about your accident. Terrible thing. But it's heartening to see Mrs. Dalton giving you useful work. Christian charity, helping those less fortunate. Caleb didn't respond, just watched Hale with eyes that gave nothing away. The silence stretched. One of Hale's men shifted in his saddle. Pike's hand drifted toward his sidearm, then stopped when Caleb's eyes flicked toward him. Well, Hale said finally, I won't keep you. I just wanted to make sure you understood that my offer still stands. In fact, given the improvements you've made, I'd be willing to increase it by 10%. That's more than fair, I think. Not interested, Rhea said. Mrs. Dalton, please think carefully. Winter's not over. You may have had some success, but one bad week, one sick cow, one accident. He let the words hang. You're one disaster away from losing everything. Take my offer. Walk away with something while you still can. The answer is no, Mr. Hale. It was no before, and it'll be no next time you ask. Hale's smile didn't change, but something behind his eyes went cold. I'm trying to help you. No, you're trying to steal from me. There's a difference. For a moment, the mask slipped. Rhea saw raw calculation there, the mind of a man who'd built an empire by buying out desperate people and discarding those who resisted. Then the smile returned, warmer and more dangerous than before. I see. Well, I hope you know what you're doing, Mrs. Dalton. This territory can be harsh to those who make enemies. He gathered his reins. Come along, gentlemen. I think we've intruded enough. They turned their horses and rode off at an unhurried walk. Rhea watched until they disappeared over the rise. That, Caleb said quietly, was a declaration of war. I know. He's going to come after us, not today, Probably not tomorrow, but soon. I know that too. Caleb looked up at her. You scared? Rhea thought about it. Thought about the broken china and stolen watch and ransacked house. Thought about the cattle they'd saved and the fence they'd built and the practice sessions that left her arms aching. Yeah, she said, but I'm angry more than I'm scared, and I'm done running. Good. Caleb turned his chair toward the door. Because running's not an option anymore. Now we dig in and make ourselves too expensive to remove. That night, they made plans. Caleb spread out a rough map of the property on the kitchen table, marking positions, sight lines, potential approaches. He talked about defensive positions and fields of fire like he was planning a military campaign, which Rhea supposed he was. We can't defend the whole property, he said. Too much ground, too few people. We concentrate on the house and barn. Make those into strong points. Anyone wants to take them, they'll pay for it. What about the cattle? Cattle can be replaced. We can't. Caleb marked another position on the map. We set watches. 2 shifts. You take evening, I'll take night. Anyone approaches, we challenge them from cover. They don't have a good reason to be here. We encourage them to leave. And if they don't leave? Caleb met her eyes. Then we make them. It sounded simple when he said it like that. Rhea knew it wouldn't be. They spent the next few days preparing. More weapons caches positioned around the property, more tripwires. Caleb even rigged a bell system. Pull one wire and a bell would ring in the house, warning of intruders. The work was exhausting, but it gave them something to do besides wait, and waiting was the hardest part. 5 days after Hale's visit, the first cow turned up dead. Rhea found it in the south pasture, a young heifer that had been healthy the day before. Its throat was cut, the blood soaked into the ground around it. But that wasn't the worst part. Someone had carved a message into its hide. Leave. Rhea stood over the corpse, her stomach churning with rage and fear in equal measure. This wasn't about the ranch anymore. This was personal. This was psychological. She rode back to the house at a gallop. Caleb was in his workshop, sharpening tools. They killed one of the cows, she said without preamble, cut its throat and carved a message. Caleb set down the whetstone. Show me. They rode out together, Rhea on Bess and Caleb in the cart. When he saw the dead heifer, his face went hard as stone. They did this last night, he said, while we were sleeping. Got past our perimeter without triggering anything. How? They're professionals. Pike's got experience. Probably military. Caleb circled the carcass, studying the ground. 3 of them, I'd say, came from the east, left the same way. Took their time about it, too. Rhea felt violation wash over her like ice water. They'd been here, on her land, killing her animals, while she slept 50 yards away. This changes things, Caleb said. How? Because now we know they're willing to kill. Not just threaten, not just vandalize. Kill. He looked at her. Next time it might not be a cow. The words hung between them, heavy with implication. What do we do? Rhea asked. Caleb was quiet for a long time, staring at the dead heifer. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft and terrible. We send them a message back. Rhea watched Caleb work by lamplight, his hands moving with the kind of precision that came from years of surviving in places that killed careless men. He was building something from materials scavenged around the ranch, metal brackets, rope, pulleys, and parts from an old wagon wheel. What is that? She asked. Insurance. He didn't look up. Help me mount this on the chair. It took an hour to get it right. When they finished, Caleb had a swivel mount attached to the arm of his wheelchair, capable of holding a rifle at shoulder height. He could traverse it a full 180 degrees, lock it in position, and fire with both hands free to work the bolt action. He tested it, sighting down the barrel at imaginary targets. The movement was smooth, controlled, deadly. Jesus, Rhea breathed. Won't help much if they rush us in daylight, but at night, from a fixed position? Caleb worked the mechanism again. I can cover the whole yard without moving the chair. You really think it'll come to that? I think they already showed us it will. That cow wasn't a warning. It was an escalation. He locked the rifle into position, then released it, practicing the motion. We respond in kind, or we fold. Those are the only options now. Rhea pulled out a chair and sat down hard. Her hands were shaking, not from fear exactly, but from the weight of what they were discussing. What kind of message are we talking about? Caleb set down the rifle and looked at her directly. The kind that makes them think twice before coming back. The kind that gets into their heads and stays there. You're talking about hurting someone. I'm talking about surviving. There's a difference, but not much of one. He leaned back in the wheelchair. I've seen what happens when you try to reason with men like Hale. I've seen what happens when you show weakness. They don't respect it. They exploit it. The only thing they understand is cost. We make the cost too high. They'll find easier prey. The logic was sound. Rhea hated that it was sound. All right, she said. What do you need me to do? They spent the next 2 days watching. Not obviously, but carefully. Caleb positioned himself at different windows throughout the day, noting patterns. When riders passed on the main road, when cattle moved in the distance, when shadows fell across the property at different hours. They'll come back, he said on the second evening, probably at night again. They got away with it once. They'll try the same approach. How can you be sure? Because people are lazy. Why change tactics when the first one worked? Caleb marked something on his rough map. They came from the east, used the creek bed as cover, probably left their horses a quarter mile out and came in on foot. So we set up there. So we set a trap there. The trap was simple in concept, brutal in execution. Caleb had Rhea string tripwires along the creek bed, each one connected to a noisemaker, tin cans filled with pebbles mostly. Not enough to injure, just enough to announce someone's presence. Then they positioned themselves in the barn loft, which had a clear view of the eastern approach. Could be tonight, could be a week from now, Caleb said as they settled into position. We take shifts, 2 hours on, 2 hours off. Stay sharp. The first night passed without incident, so did the second. On the third night, Rhea was on watch when she heard the faint rattle of disturbed cans. She touched Caleb's shoulder and he came awake instantly, no grogginess or confusion. His hand went to the rifle. East approach, Rhea whispered. They moved to the loft window. The moon was a thin crescent, barely providing light, but it was enough to see 3 shapes moving low along the creek bed, trying to stay quiet. Caleb's jaw tightened. Same bastards. Probably planning another dead cow. What do? We let them get closer. Then we make our point. Rhea's heart was hammering so hard she thought the men below might hear it. She watched them approach the pasture where the cattle slept. One of them had a knife that caught the moonlight. Now, Caleb said. Rhea stood and fired a warning shot into the air. The crack of the rifle shattered the night silence. All 3 men froze. Next one's not a warning, Rhea shouted. Get off my land! For a moment, nobody moved. Then one of the men raised what looked like a pistol. Caleb's rifle spoke twice in rapid succession. The first shot kicked up dirt 2 feet in front of the man. The second took his hat clean off his head. Run, Caleb said conversationally, or the third one goes through your skull. They ran. Rhea watched them scramble back toward the creek bed, their carefully planned stealth abandoned in favor of pure survival instinct. Within 30 seconds, they disappeared into the darkness. Think they got the message? Rhea asked. Her voice was steadier than she felt. Maybe. Or maybe we just pissed them off worse. Caleb reloaded the rifle with practiced efficiency. Either way, they know now that we're not sleeping, that we're ready. That cost them the element of surprise. They stayed in the loft for another hour, but the men didn't return. Eventually, Caleb declared it safe enough to go back to the house. Sleep didn't come easy after that. Rhea lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment over and over. The men running, Caleb's cold precision, her own finger on the trigger. She'd crossed a line tonight. They both had. Morning brought no relief, just gray sky and the certainty that things were going to get worse before they got better. Caleb was already up, coffee made, when Rhea came downstairs. He looked like he hadn't slept at all. We need to talk about what comes next, he said without preamble. All right. Last night was a win. Small one, but a win. We proved we're not helpless, but Hale's going to escalate. He has to. If he lets us push back without consequences, he looks weak. So what's the next move? His or ours? Both. Caleb poured himself more coffee, his movements deliberate. He'll probably try to isolate us, cut off supplies, turn the town against us, make it so we can't get help. After that, he'll come with overwhelming force. Not 3 men at night, a dozen men in daylight. The picture he painted was grim. Rhea felt the walls closing in. And our move? We fortify, we prepare, and we make one more gesture that shows we're serious. What kind of gesture? Caleb met her eyes. The kind that makes the next man who comes here think real hard about whether the money's worth it. 2 days later, riders approached again. But this time it was different. This time it was Pike, alone, carrying a white flag tied to a stick. Rhea and Caleb met him in the yard, both armed. Mrs. Dalton, Pike said, keeping his distance. Mr. Rourke. I come in peace. That's new, Caleb said. Pike's face was tight with barely controlled anger. Mr. Hale wants to make something clear. What happened the other night? That was unauthorized. Those men acted on their own initiative. Mr. Hale don't condone trespassing or property damage. Bullshit, Rhea said flatly. Ma'am, I understand your skepticism, but it's bullshit and we all know it, Caleb interrupted. Hale sent them, same as he sent whoever trashed this house a month ago. So skip the performance and tell us what you really came here to say. Pike's hand tightened on the reins. For a moment, Rhea thought he might go for his gun. Then he seemed to force himself to relax. Mr. Hale wants to extend one final offer. He'll pay full market value for this property. Top dollar. You walk away with enough money to start over somewhere else, somewhere easier, clean slate. Not interested. Mrs. Dalton, be reasonable. You can't win this. You got lucky the other night, but luck runs out. Mr. Hale's got resources you can't match. He's got men, money, influence. All you got is stubbornness and a cripple with a rifle. That cripple's a better shot than anyone on Hale's payroll, Rhea said, including you. So I'd watch my mouth if I were standing where you're standing. Pike's face went red. This is your last chance. After this, Mr. Hale's patience runs out. And when that happens, he's going to find out that taking this ranch costs more than it's worth, Caleb said. His voice was quiet, but there was something in it that made Pike's horse sidestep nervously. You tell Hale that. Tell him every man he sends here will send back missing something. Could be his nerve, could be his trigger finger, could be his life. But everyone who comes here pays a price, and the price keeps going up. You're threatening Mr. Hale? I'm informing him of the situation. What he does with that information is his business. Caleb's hand rested on the rifle across his lap. Now get off this property before I decide you're trespassing. Pike stared at them for a long moment. Then he spat into the dirt, wheeled his horse around, and rode off at a gallop. That, Rhea said, just made things worse. Yeah. Caleb watched Pike disappear over the rise. But at least now we're all being honest about it. The tension ratcheted up another notch. Rhea found herself checking the horizon constantly, waiting for the attack she knew was coming. Caleb reinforced their defenses, creating more fallback positions, more caches of weapons and ammunition. 3 days passed. 4. A week. Nothing. The waiting was torture. Rhea couldn't sleep properly, couldn't eat without her stomach churning. Every sound in the night was a potential threat. Every bird taking flight might signal approaching riders. Why aren't they coming? She asked on the 8th day. Because they're making us sweat, making us paranoid, wearing us down mentally before they hit us physically. Caleb was working on another device, this one involving rope and a spring mechanism. Classic siege tactic. You don't have to storm the walls if the defenders collapse from exhaustion first. So what do? We maintain routine. We don't let them see that it's working. He tested the spring, nodded in satisfaction, and we finish our preparations. That night, Caleb showed her what he'd been building. A series of traps positioned around the property, some designed to injure, others just to disorient and delay. Tripwires that would trigger shotgun shells mounted in fixed positions, pits covered with thin boards and dirt. A deadfall positioned above the barn entrance that could drop a log on anyone who came through without knowing the release mechanism. This is elaborate, Rhea said, studying the map he'd drawn showing each trap's location. This is necessary. When they come, and they will come, we can't just rely on shooting straight. We need every advantage. He marked another position. Fire's going to be their main weapon. They'll try to burn us out, force us into the open, so we prepare for that too. He'd positioned barrels of water around the property, along with sand and dirt for smothering flames. He'd cleared brush from around the buildings, eliminating easy fuel for fires. He'd even soaked the barn walls with water every evening, keeping the wood too damp to catch easily. You've done this before, Rhea said. It wasn't a question. Different situation, same principle. In the mountains, you learn to think like the things hunting you. Understand their tactics, prepare for them, turn their strengths into weaknesses. He looked at her. Hale thinks he's the predator here. We're going to show him he's wrong. The attack came on a moonless night 2 weeks after Pike's visit. Rhea was on watch in the barn loft when she saw them. Not 3 men this time. Not 6. At least a dozen, maybe more, approaching from multiple directions. She grabbed the bell rope and rang it 3 times. The signal for all-out assault. Caleb appeared in the barn door within seconds, wheeling himself to the position they'd prepared. He'd built a small platform there, reinforced with sandbags, that gave him cover and elevation. The weapon mount on his chair locked into place with a metallic click. "How many?" he called up. "Dozen or more, coming from the east and north. Let them get close. Soon as they hit the first trap, we light them up." Rhea positioned herself at the loft window, rifle ready. Her hands were surprisingly steady despite the adrenaline screaming through her veins. All those practice sessions, all those hours of preparation, condensing into this single moment. The riders came closer. She could hear them now, trying to be quiet, but the sheer number making stealth impossible. They'd split into 2 groups, one heading for the house, the other for the barn. The first trap triggered with a sharp crack. One of the approaching riders screamed as the shotgun blast caught him in the legs. His horse bolted, throwing him to the ground. "Now!" Caleb shouted. Rhea fired at the muzzle flash from a pistol. Didn't know if she hit anything, just kept working the bolt, firing, working the bolt again. Below, Caleb's rifle spoke in measured cadence, each shot deliberate and purposeful. The attackers scattered, looking for cover. Someone was yelling orders, but the words were lost in the chaos. More gunfire erupted from the direction of the house. They were shooting at shadows, wasting ammunition. Then Rhea smelled smoke. "They're trying to burn us out," she called down. "Expected that. Keep shooting." Fire blossomed on the east side of the barn. Rhea saw a man running toward it with a torch, saw Caleb track him with the rifle, saw the man go down hard. The torch flew from his hand, landing in damp grass that refused to catch. Another attacker made it to the barn wall and hurled something through a window. Glass shattered. The smell of kerosene filled the air. "Getting out!" Rhea abandoned her position and scrambled down the ladder. Smoke was already filling the lower level. Caleb had rolled back from his position, trying to get clear, but the chair caught on something. He struggled with it, cursing. Rhea grabbed the handles and yanked. The chair came free and she shoved it toward the side exit, the one they'd left unobstructed for exactly this situation. Outside, the yard was chaos. Men running, shooting, shouting. The barn was catching now despite the dampened walls, flames climbing toward the roof. In the firelight, Rhea could see riders circling, looking for targets. "Behind the water barrels." Caleb pointed to the position they'd prepared, 50 feet from the barn. They made it halfway before a rider spotted them and wheeled his horse around, pistol raised. Caleb's rifle barked. The rider jerked and fell. Another rider appeared, then another. They were everywhere. More than Rhea had counted. This wasn't a raid, this was an execution. She fired until the Winchester clicked empty, then drew the pistol from her belt and kept firing. Beside her, Caleb worked his rifle like a machine, each shot measured, each one finding its mark. The barn collapsed with a roar of flame and timber. Sparks flew into the sky like dying stars. "They're pulling back," Rhea shouted over the noise. It was true. The attackers were retreating, dragging their wounded with them. Within minutes, the yard was empty except for 2 men who weren't getting up again, and one who was crawling toward his horse, leaving a dark trail behind him. Rhea and Caleb stayed behind the barrels, weapons ready, waiting for the second wave. It didn't come. They waited until dawn, taking turns watching the horizon. When the sun finally rose, it revealed the full extent of the damage. The barn was gone, just smoking rubble and twisted metal. The house had scorch marks but had survived. Bullet holes peppered the walls, and in the yard the bodies of 2 of Hale's men lay where they'd fallen. "We need to move them," Rhea said. Her voice sounded distant to her own ears. "Leave them." "What?" "Leave them," Caleb repeated. "Let Hale come collect them. Let him see what it costs to come here. Let every man who rides for him see it too." It felt wrong, felt barbaric. But Rhea was too tired to argue, and some part of her understood the logic. This was the message Caleb had talked about. the one that got into people's heads and stayed there. They spent the morning tending wounds, minor ones, miraculously, and taking stock. The barn was a total loss. Several of the cattle had scattered during the fight. Ammunition was running low, but they were alive, and the house still stood. Around noon, riders appeared on the horizon. A lot of them. Rhea's stomach dropped. They're coming back. But Caleb was studying them through a spyglass he'd found in Thomas's things. That's not Hale's men. Look at the way they're riding. That's a posse. As they got closer, Rhea could make out a star on one rider's vest. The law, such as it was in this territory. The marshal was a lean man named Garrett, gray-haired and weathered, with eyes that missed nothing. He surveyed the scene, the burned barn, the bodies, Rhea and Caleb standing armed and defiant, and let out a long breath. Mrs. Dalton, Mr. Rourke, someone want to explain what happened here? Rhea explained. All of it. The dead cow, the threats, the attack last night. Garrett listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes in a small book. When she finished, he looked at the bodies. These men work for Victor Hale. Yes? You sure about that? Positive. That one's name was Coleman. The other I don't know, but I've seen him riding with Pike. Garrett walked over to the bodies, studied them for a long moment. This is going to be complicated. Complicated how? Caleb asked. We were defending our property from an armed attack. I don't doubt it, but Hale's got friends in the territorial government. He's going to say you murdered his men, going to push for charges. Let him push, Rhea said. We've got witnesses. You've got each other. That's not the same thing. Garrett rubbed his face tiredly. Look, between you and me, I know what Hale is. I know what he does. But knowing and proving are different things. He's careful, keeps his hands clean. So what are you saying? Rhea demanded. We should have just let them burn us out? I'm saying the law is a blunt instrument, and men like Hale know how to work around it. Garrett gestured to his men, who began loading the bodies onto a wagon. I'll file a report. Self-defense, armed assault on a homestead. But don't be surprised if Hale's lawyers make trouble. After they left, Rhea and Caleb stood in the ruined yard, exhaustion settling over them like a blanket. We won, Rhea said. It didn't feel like victory. We survived, Caleb corrected. That's not the same as winning. What's the difference? Winning means it's over. This? He gestured at the devastation around them. This is just beginning. That night, they didn't sleep in the house. Too exposed, too dangerous. Instead, they set up in the root cellar, a small underground space that could be defended if necessary. Rhea lay on a bedroll, staring at the ceiling beams above her. Every muscle ached. Her ears still rang from the gunfire. The smell of smoke clung to everything. You did good tonight, Caleb said from the darkness. Doesn't feel good. Rarely does, but you didn't freeze. Didn't panic. That's what matters. Rhea was quiet for a moment. I killed someone. Maybe more than one. Yeah. Doesn't that bother you? Every day. Every man I killed up in the mountains, every one I killed tonight. They all bother me. But being bothered and being wrong aren't the same thing. Those men came here to kill us. We stopped them. Feel bad about that if you need to, but don't feel guilty. It helped. A little. Not much, but a little. What happens now? Rhea asked. Now we rebuild. Again. And we prepare for round 3. You think there'll be a round 3? I know there will. Hale lost men tonight. Lost face. He can't let that stand. Caleb shifted on his own bedroll. But we proved something too. We proved we're not easy prey. Every man he sends here from now on is going to remember Coleman and the other one. Going to remember the barn burning and bullets flying. Some of them won't come. The ones who do will be more careful, more scared. Fear's a weapon, Rhea. We just put it in our arsenal. The words should have been comforting. Instead, they just underscored how far they'd come from a simple struggle to save a ranch. This was war now, declared and acknowledged, and there was no walking it back. Rhea closed her eyes and tried to sleep, knowing it wouldn't come easy, knowing tomorrow would bring more challenges, more decisions, more violence. But she was still here. They were still here, and that had to count for something. The morning after the attack brought unwelcome visitors in the form of 3 men from town. Rhea recognized them, shopkeepers mostly, men who'd sold her goods on credit when Thomas was alive and stopped extending that courtesy the day he died. The lead man was named Brennan, owned the general store. He stood at the property line like it might burn him if he crossed it, hat in his hands, face doing a poor job of hiding his discomfort. "Mrs. Dalton," he called out, "might we have a word?" Rhea walked down to meet them, rifle slung over her shoulder. Caleb stayed on the porch, positioned where he could see everything. After last night, neither of them went anywhere without weapons in easy reach. "Mr. Brennan," Rhea said, stopping a few feet away. "What brings you out here?" Brennan glanced at the burned barn, the bullet-scarred house, the dark stains in the dirt that no amount of rain would wash away for weeks. "We heard about the trouble. Wanted to check you were all right." "We're alive." "That's good. That's real good." Brennan shifted his weight. "Thing is, Mrs. Dalton, there's been talk about what happened here. About you and Mr. Hale." "What kind of talk?" One of the other men spoke up, Carter, who ran the feed store. "Hale's saying you murdered two of his ranch hands in cold blood. Says they came here peacefully to deliver a message and you ambushed them." Rhea felt her jaw tighten. "That's a lie." "Maybe so, maybe not. Point is, he's got the territorial judge's ear. He's pushing for an investigation." Brennan twisted his hat. "Folks in town, they're worried. Worried about being caught in the middle of whatever this is." "So you came to tell me what? That you're taking his side?" "No, ma'am. We came to suggest maybe it's time you considered Mr. Hale's offer. Sell the place, take the money, avoid a lot of unpleasantness for everyone." The third man, whose name Rhea couldn't remember, nodded eagerly. "It's good money, more than fair. You could start over somewhere peaceful." Rhea looked at each of them in turn, saw the fear there, the desire to avoid conflict, the willingness to sacrifice her to maintain their comfortable neutrality. "Tell me something," she said. "When Hale's men came here with torches and guns, were you worried about unpleasantness then? When they killed my cattle, when they ransacked my house, when they tried to burn me alive in my barn, where was this concern for avoiding trouble?" Brennan had the decency to look ashamed. "Mrs. Dalton, I'm not selling. Not to Hale, not to anyone. This is my land, and I'll die on it before I let him take it." She adjusted the rifle on her shoulder. "Now, unless you've got actual business, I suggest you leave." They left, but not before Carter muttered something about stubborn women getting what they deserved. Rhea pretended not to hear it, but her finger tightened on the rifle strap. Back on the porch, Caleb was cleaning his rifle, the motions automatic and soothing. "Town's turning against us." "Yeah. Can't say I'm surprised. Fear makes cowards of most people." He held the barrel up to the light, checking for fouling. "Question is, how far will that fear take them?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, will they just refuse to do business with us, or will they actively help Hale?" Caleb started reassembling the rifle. "Because if it's the latter, we're in deeper trouble than we thought." The answer came 3 days later when Rhea rode into town for supplies. She had a list of essentials: ammunition, flour, coffee, medical supplies, and money scraped together from selling 2 of the older cows to a rancher passing through. Brennan's store was her first stop. She tied Bess to the post and walked in, noting how the handful of customers went quiet when they saw her. Brennan looked up from behind the counter, and something flickered across his face. Guilt, maybe? Or resignation? "Mrs. Dalton." "Mr. Brennan, I need supplies." She set her list on the counter. He glanced at it without picking it up. "I'm afraid I can't help you." "Can't or won't?" "Both." He wouldn't meet her eyes. "Mr. Hale's made it clear that anyone doing business with you will lose his patronage. I can't afford that." "I have money." "Doesn't matter. I'm sorry, but you'll have to go elsewhere." Elsewhere turned out to be nowhere. The feed store refused her. The smithy wouldn't even speak to her. By the time she reached the last shop, a small dry goods place run by an old widow named Mrs. Chen, Rhea was shaking with rage and humiliation. Mrs. Chen, at least, had the courage to look apologetic. "I would help if I could, dear, but Hale owns the building I rent. He's threatened eviction if I serve you." "He can't do that." "He can, and he will. I've seen him destroy people for less." The old woman's eyes were sad. "You should take his offer, child. No piece of land is worth dying for." Rhea rode back to the ranch empty-handed, her supplies unmet, her pride in tatters. The isolation was complete now. No town support, no supplies, no resources, except what they could scavenge or produce themselves. Caleb took the news with grim acceptance. Expected this. Hale's smart. He knows he can't just shoot us without consequences, so he's trying to starve us out. What do? We adapt. Again. He was already making notes. We've got enough ammunition for now if we're careful. Food's going to be the problem. Winter's not over yet, so hunting will be lean. We've got the cattle. We need those to rebuild the herd come spring. Can't eat our seed stock. Caleb tapped the pencil against his teeth. We'll have to get creative. Fish from the creek. Set trap lines. Maybe raid Hale's storehouses. That's stealing. So is trying to starve us to death, but he's doing it legal-like. Caleb met her eyes. We're past the point of playing by rules he doesn't follow. Either we do whatever it takes to survive, or we die noble and hungry. Your choice. It wasn't really a choice, and they both knew it. That night, they planned their first raid. Not on Hale's main property. That would be too well guarded. But he owned several satellite ranches, smaller operations managed by foremen. Those would have supply sheds, maybe food stores, definitely materials they could use. The Copper Creek property, Caleb said, marking it on the map. About 6 miles south, smaller operation, maybe 5 or 6 hands. They keep supplies in a shed near the main house. How do you know that? Because that's how every ranch works. The question is whether they're expecting trouble. After what happened here, they're probably expecting an army. Good. Fear makes people sloppy. Caleb started sketching a rough plan. We go in 2 nights from now. New moon, so visibility's low. In and out fast, take only what we need. Make it look like drifters, not us. And if we get caught, we don't. The confidence in his voice was almost convincing. They spent the next day preparing. Rhea packed saddlebags with rope, tools, empty sacks. Caleb made sure their weapons were clean and loaded. Neither of them talked much about what they were planning, as if speaking it aloud would make it more real, more criminal. The night of the raid, Rhea felt like she was going to vomit. They left at midnight, Rhea on horseback and Caleb in a light cart pulled by Bess. The ride to Copper Creek Ranch took 2 hours, following back trails and keeping to low ground. The moon was barely a sliver, the darkness almost complete. Half a mile from the property, they left the cart and horse tied to a tree. Caleb transferred to his wheelchair, a lighter version he'd built specifically for this, with larger wheels that could handle rough terrain if Rhea pushed. Remember, he whispered as they approached. Fast and quiet. We're ghosts. The ranch was dark except for a single lamp in what looked like the bunkhouse. Rhea could hear snoring from inside. The supply shed was exactly where Caleb had predicted, a squat building with a padlock on the door. Caleb produced a metal pick and had the lock open in under a minute. Inside, shelves held exactly what they needed: flour, salt, coffee, sugar, even some canned goods. Rhea filled her sacks while Caleb kept watch, his rifle across his lap. 2 minutes, he whispered. Rhea worked faster, grabbing essentials. She was reaching for a box of ammunition when a dog started barking. Time to go, Caleb hissed. They moved as quickly as they could, but stealth and speed don't mix well. The barking got louder. A light appeared in the bunkhouse window. Someone's in the shed, a voice yelled. Rhea abandoned subtlety and just grabbed the nearest sacks, slinging them over her shoulder. Caleb was already moving, his arms working the wheelchair wheels in powerful strokes. Men poured out of the bunkhouse, some in various states of undress, all armed. Someone fired a shot that went wide, then another that kicked up dirt near Caleb's wheels. "Don't stop!" he shouted at Rhea. She didn't. She ran through the darkness, branches whipping her face, the heavy sacks threatening to pull her down. Behind her, she heard Caleb's rifle crack twice, heard cursing and the sound of men diving for cover. They reached the cart and Rhea threw the sacks in the back while Caleb hauled himself up. She didn't bother with the wheelchair, just slapped Bess's reins and the horse bolted. More shots rang out, but they were already disappearing into the darkness. The pursuit lasted maybe a quarter mile before giving up. Nobody wanted to chase armed thieves into unknown territory at night. They didn't stop until they were back on Dalton land. Only then did Rhea let herself breathe. That, she said between gasps, was insane. That was necessary. Caleb was checking the sacks. We got maybe 3 weeks of supplies here, maybe 4 if we're careful. They'll know it was us. They'll suspect. Can't prove it. He pulled out a bag of coffee and smiled. Worth it. Despite everything, Rhea found herself smiling too. They'd done it. Stolen from Hale, gotten away clean, and now had supplies that would keep them going. It felt like victory, even if it was built on theft. The next week passed intense anticipation of retaliation that never came. Hale seemed content to maintain the siege, cutting them off from the town, spreading rumors, making their lives difficult without resorting to more violence. Then Marshal Garrett returned, and this time he wasn't alone. The man with him wore a suit that looked expensive, even covered in trail dust. He had the bearing of someone used to being important, and papers in a leather case that he carried like they were sacred texts. "Mrs. Dalton," Garrett said wearily, "this is Judge Whitmore. He's here about the incident." Whitmore dismounted with the careful movements of someone who didn't ride often. "Mrs. Dalton, Mr. Rourke. I'm investigating the deaths of Samuel Coleman and Jack Reeves, employees of Mr. Victor Hale. I have some questions." "We acted in self-defense," Rhea said. "They attacked us." "So you've said." "Unfortunately, Mr. Hale tells a different story. He claims his men were delivering a legal notice when you opened fire without provocation." "That's a lie." "Perhaps, but Mr. Hale has witnesses who will testify to his version of events." Whitmore opened his case and pulled out papers. "I have statements from 6 men who claim they saw the whole thing." 6 men who work for Hale and will say whatever he pays them to say," Caleb said flatly. "Be that as it may, the law requires I investigate. And frankly, the evidence is concerning. 2 men dead, killed on your property. You admit to shooting them. The question is whether it was justified." Whitmore's eyes were cold. "I'm inclined to bring formal charges. Murder in the commission of a property dispute." Rhea felt the ground drop out from under her. "You can't be serious." "I'm entirely serious. However, Mr. Hale has made a generous offer. If you agree to sell him this property at the previously discussed price, he's willing to drop the matter entirely. No charges filed, no trial. You walk away free and clear." "That's extortion," Caleb said. "That's justice tempered with mercy." Whitmore tucked the papers back into his case. "You have 3 days to decide. After that, I issue an arrest warrant and this goes to trial. I'll let you consider your options." After they left, Rhea sat on the porch steps and put her head in her hands. "He's got us. Even if we're acquitted, the legal costs would bankrupt us. And if we're convicted, we won't be convicted because we're not going to trial." Caleb's voice was hard. "Whitmore's in Hale's pocket. That whole speech was theater. They want us to fold." "So what do? We can't fight a judge. Can't we?" Caleb was staring at the horizon, his mind clearly working through possibilities. "Whitmore's lever is legal, but legal only works if people believe in it. What if we remove that belief?" "I don't understand." "Hale's been building his empire by using the law as a weapon. Crooked judges, bought witnesses, legal theft. But it only works if people accept the system." Caleb turned to look at her. "What if we expose it? Show everyone exactly what Hale is." "How?" "We need evidence. Something undeniable. Something that proves Hale ordered the attacks, that Whitmore's corrupt, that the whole thing's rotten." Caleb's eyes had that dangerous light again. "And I know where to get it." Over the next 2 days, Caleb laid out his plan. It was audacious, risky, and probably illegal in about 6 different ways, but it was also their only shot. Hale kept records. Every business transaction, every payment, every deal, all meticulously documented in ledgers stored in his office. If they could get those ledgers, they'd have proof of bribes paid to Whitmore, payments to the men who'd attacked the ranch, maybe even records of other properties Hale had stolen. "His office is in his main house," Rhea said, studying the rough map Caleb had drawn, "which is guarded constantly during the day. At night, most of the guards are at the bunkhouse or patrolling the perimeter. The house itself is just Hale and maybe a servant or 2. So we break into a fortified house, bypass whatever guards are there, find an office we've never seen, locate specific ledgers, and get out without being caught or killed." Rhea shook her head. "That's impossible. So was holding this ranch. So was surviving that attack. We keep doing impossible things." Caleb's jaw was set. "I can't do this one alone, Rhea. I need you, but I won't force you. If you want to take Hale's deal, sell the ranch and walk away." "I'd understand." Rhea thought about it, really thought about it. She could take the money, start over somewhere else, leave all this violence and fear behind. It would be the smart thing, the safe thing. But she thought about the fence they'd built together, the traps they'd set, the nights they'd stood watch side by side. Thought about Thomas's dream of this place, how it had died with him until Caleb had helped her resurrect it into something harder and more real. "When do we go?" she asked. Caleb smiled, fierce and proud. "Tomorrow night. Time to take the fight to them." They spent the next day preparing with the same attention to detail they'd given everything else. Weapons cleaned and loaded, route planned and memorized, contingencies discussed for every scenario they could imagine. As the sun set, Rhea felt a strange calm settle over her. This was it. The moment that would determine everything. They'd either come back with evidence that could destroy Hale, or they wouldn't come back at all. "You scared?" Caleb asked as they loaded the cart. "Terrified." "Good. Fear keeps you sharp." He checked his rifle one more time. "But don't let it control you. We've prepared. We know what we're doing. Now we just execute." The ride to Hale's property took 3 hours. They approached from the west, using a ravine for cover, and left the cart a half-mile out. Caleb's wheelchair was the light version again, and Rhea had blackened both their faces with charcoal to reduce visibility. The main house sat on a small rise, a sprawling 2-story building that spoke of wealth and power. Lights burned in several windows. Guards walked regular patrols, their routes predictable enough to time. "There," Caleb whispered, pointing to a window on the ground floor. "Office. I can see bookshelves through the gap in the curtains." "How do we get in?" "Front door's out, too exposed. But that window on the east side, you can reach it from that oak tree. Climb up, get inside, let me in through the side door." It sounded simple when he said it like that. Rhea waited until the patrol passed, then moved. The oak tree's branches were thick enough to hold her weight, and she climbed like she'd done as a child, finding handholds in the dark. The window was unlocked, arrogance or oversight, she didn't care which. Inside, she found herself in a hallway. The house was quiet except for the sound of someone moving around upstairs. She crept to the side door and eased it open. Caleb rolled in silently. Together they made their way to the office. The door was closed, but not locked. Inside, exactly as Caleb had predicted, were shelves lined with ledgers. "Start looking," he whispered. "Dates from the last 6 months. Anything marked expenses or contracts." They worked by moonlight, filtering through the curtains, pulling ledgers, scanning pages. Most of it was routine business: cattle purchases, supply orders, payroll. But then Rhea found it. A ledger marked special accounts. Inside, entries that made her blood run cold. Payment to Judge Whitmore for legal consultation, $500. Payment to Pike for security services, amounts that increased after each attack on the Dalton Ranch. Even an entry for Henderson property acquisition, the very fence post they'd tried to salvage. "Got it," she breathed. "Take the whole book. We leave now." They were almost to the door when footsteps sounded in the hallway. Heavy boots. Coming closer. Caleb grabbed Rhea's arm and pointed to a large desk. They dove behind it just as the office door opened and light spilled in. Victor Hale walked in carrying a lamp. He was in his shirt sleeves, clearly not expecting company. He went to the shelves, searching for something. Rhea held her breath, pressed against the desk, the ledger clutched to her chest. Beside her, Caleb had his knife drawn, ready. Hale pulled a ledger from the shelf, not the one they'd taken, and started to turn. Then he paused. "Strange," he muttered. "Could have sworn I left the window closed." He walked toward the window. Rhea's heart hammered. If he saw them, if he called out, they were dead. But Hale just closed the window, latched it, and left the room, taking his lamp with him. They waited in the darkness for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Then Caleb moved, gesturing toward the door. The house was still quiet. They made it to the side door, out into the night, across the yard, moving from shadow to shadow. A guard passed within 10 feet of them and never looked their way. Back at the cart, Rhea finally let herself breathe. They'd done it. They had the evidence. They had proof. "Now comes the hard part," Caleb said as they started the long ride home. "Figuring out who to give this to that Hale hasn't already bought." The answer came from an unexpected source. 2 days later, as they were studying the ledger and making notes, a rider approached the ranch. Rhea grabbed her rifle instinctively, but the man held up empty hands. "Mrs. Dalton, I'm not here to cause trouble." It was one of the men from the first auction. a rancher named McGregor who'd bid on one of the stronger workers. He looked nervous, sitting his horse at the property line. "What do you want?" Rhea called. "I heard what Hale's doing to you, the town cutoff, the crooked judge. I wanted you to know some of us don't approve." "Approval doesn't help much." "Maybe not, but information might." McGregor glanced over his shoulder like he was worried about being followed. "There's a federal marshal passing through next week. Name's Denton. He's based out of Denver, which means Hale doesn't have him in his pocket. If you wanted to make a complaint, show him evidence, well, he's the kind of man who might actually listen." Rhea and Caleb exchanged looks. "Why are you telling us this?" Caleb asked. "Because Hale's been getting away with murder, sometimes literal murder, for too long. And because I remember when this territory was about building something, not stealing it from folks who did the building." McGregor touched his hat. "Federal marshal. 1 week. The Cattleman Hotel in town. That's all I know." He rode off before they could ask more questions. "Could be a trap," Rhea said. "Could be. Or it could be exactly what we need." Caleb was already thinking ahead. "We've got the evidence. If this Denton's legitimate, if he's really outside Hale's influence, then we might actually have a chance." The week dragged by, every day feeling like a month. They kept watch, expecting Hale to realize the ledger was missing, expecting retaliation. But nothing came. Maybe he hadn't noticed yet. Maybe he was planning something worse. When the day finally came, they rode into town together. Rhea had the ledger wrapped in oilcloth and hidden in her saddlebag. Caleb had his rifle and that dangerous calm that meant he was ready for anything. The Cattleman Hotel was the nicest building in town, which wasn't saying much. Inside, they found Marshal Denton in the dining room, eating breakfast and reading a newspaper. He was younger than Rhea expected, maybe 40, with sharp eyes that sized them up as they approached. "Marshal Denton," Rhea said. "My name is Rhea Dalton. This is Caleb Rourke. We need to report a crime." Denton set down his coffee cup and studied them with the kind of attention that made Rhea feel like he was cataloging every detail. The scar on her cheek from a branch during the raid, the way Caleb's hands rested on his rifle, the dirt under their fingernails that no amount of scrubbing could remove. "Sit," he said finally. "Tell me everything." They did, starting with Thomas's death and working forward through every threat, every attack, every act of violence and intimidation. Rhea did most of the talking while Caleb provided details, dates, specifics that painted a picture of systematic terror. Denton listened without interrupting, making occasional notes in a small book. When they finished, he sat back and folded his arms. "That's quite a story. You have proof?" Rhea produced the ledger. Denton spent 20 minutes going through it, his expression never changing. When he finally looked up, something had shifted in his eyes. "This is damning. Bribes to a territorial judge, payments for what are clearly criminal acts, documentation of property theft." He closed the ledger. "Where did you get this?" "Does it matter?" Caleb asked. "Legally? Yes. If you stole it, a lawyer could argue it's inadmissible." Rhea and Caleb exchanged glances. They'd known this might be a problem. "We borrowed it," Rhea said, "from someone who's been using it to commit crimes." Denton almost smiled. "Borrowed, I see." He drummed his fingers on the table. "Here's the situation. Victor Hale is a wealthy, influential man with friends in Denver and probably Washington. Taking him down won't be easy or quick. But if what you're telling me is true, and this ledger suggests it is, then he's been operating a criminal enterprise under the guise of legitimate business." "So you'll help us?" Rhea asked. "I'll investigate. That's what I can promise. But Mrs. Dalton, Mr. Rourke, you need to understand something. An investigation takes time, weeks, maybe months. During that time, Hale will know I'm looking at him. He'll get more dangerous, not less." "We can handle dangerous," Caleb said. "Can you handle a siege? Because that's what this will be." Denton leaned forward. "The smart thing would be to leave. Let me do my job, come back when it's safe." "This is our home," Rhea said. "We're not leaving." Denton studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, but I need you to stay alive long enough for me to build a case. That means no more raids, no more confrontations. Keep your heads down and let the law work." It wasn't the answer Rhea wanted, but it was something, more than they'd had yesterday. As they were leaving, Denton called after them. One more thing. Judge Whitmore's arrest warrant, consider it void. I'll be having a conversation with him about his conduct. He won't be bothering you again. Small victories. They'd have to be enough. The ride back to the ranch felt different somehow, lighter. For the first time in months, Rhea felt like they weren't completely alone in this fight. You think he can actually do it? She asked Caleb. Bring Hale down. If the evidence holds up, maybe. Federal marshals have jurisdiction over territorial judges. And Denton seemed like the real thing. Caleb shifted in the cart. But he's right about one thing. Hale's going to get desperate when he figures out what's happening. Desperate men do stupid, violent things. So we prepare for that. Yeah, we prepare. The next week was quiet. Too quiet. No riders appeared on the horizon. No threats materialized. It felt like the pause before a storm breaks, when the air gets heavy and still. Caleb used the time to reinforce their defenses even further. He built proper firing positions around the house, created more escape routes, stockpiled everything they might need for an extended siege. The ranch started to look less like a home and more like a fortress. Rhea found herself thinking about what came after. Assuming they survived, assuming Hale was actually brought to justice. What then? The barn was still rubble. The cattle were barely hanging on. They had debts and damage and a future that looked only marginally less bleak than it had months ago. You ever think about what normal looks like? She asked one evening as they sat on the porch. Caleb was whittling again, turning a piece of wood into something that might eventually be recognizable. Normal's overrated. Tried it once. Didn't take. I'm serious. So am I. He held up the half-carved figure. A bird, maybe, or a very abstract horse. Normal means comfortable. Comfortable means soft. Soft means dead, in places like this. That's a bleak way to see the world. It's an honest way. This territory doesn't reward softness. It rewards people who adapt, who fight, who refuse to quit even when quitting makes sense. He set down the carving and looked at her. You were normal once. Rancher's wife, living a quiet life. Would you go back to that if you could? Rhea thought about it. About Thomas and his gentle dreams, about days that passed in comfortable routine, about a life that now seemed to belong to someone else entirely. No, she said finally. I don't think I would. There's your answer then. The truth was, she'd changed. They both had. The woman who'd bought a paralyzed man at an auction out of desperation was gone, replaced by someone harder and more capable. Someone who could shoot straight under pressure, who could plan raids and set traps, who could stand in the face of overwhelming force and refuse to break. She wasn't sure if that was growth or just damage, but it was permanent either way. The storm broke on a Tuesday morning. Rhea was in the chicken coop collecting eggs when she heard the thunder of hoofbeats. Not a few riders this time, dozens. She ran to the house, eggs forgotten. Caleb was already at the window watching through a spyglass. How many? Rhea demanded. 20, maybe more. His voice was flat. They're not hiding it this time. This is a full assault. Hale? Leading them himself. Rhea grabbed her rifle and checked the load. Her hands were steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. All their preparation, all their planning, it came down to this. The riders stopped at the property line, arranged in a loose semicircle. Victor Hale sat his horse in the center, looking for all the world like a general surveying a battlefield. Mrs. Dalton, he called out. Mr. Rourke, I'd like to have a conversation. Stay inside, Caleb said. Don't give him a target. But Rhea moved to the door and opened it a crack, keeping herself behind cover. Say what you came to say, Hale. I'm a reasonable man, Mrs. Dalton. I've tried to handle this situation with patience and generosity, but you've made that impossible. His voice carried across the yard, smooth and cultured even now. You stole from me. Broke into my home like a common thief. That ledger you took belongs to me. That ledger proves you're a criminal. That ledger proves I run a successful business. But I can see you're determined to misunderstand. Hale shifted in his saddle. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to return my property. Then you're going to sign papers transferring this ranch to me. And then you're going to leave this territory and never come back. And if we don't, then I stop being reasonable. Rhea felt Caleb's hand on her shoulder, pulling her back from the door. Don't engage. Let him talk himself out. But Hale wasn't done. You have 1 hour to decide. After that, my men are going to come up there and take what's mine. You can make this easy, or you can make this bloody. Your choice." The riders settled in to wait, clearly prepared to make good on the threat. "An hour," Rhea said. "What do we do?" Caleb was already moving, checking weapons, positioning supplies. "We hold, it's what we've been preparing for." "Against 20 men?" "Against whatever comes." He locked a rifle into the mount on his chair. "You remember the plan?" They had multiple plans, actually. Plans for different approaches, different numbers, different scenarios. But they all boiled down to the same basic principle: make every inch of ground cost them blood. "I remember," Rhea said. The hour passed like a held breath. Rhea took position at an upstairs window with a clear view of the eastern approach. Caleb remained downstairs covering the front. They'd positioned spare rifles at every window, loaded and ready, water buckets in case of fire, extra ammunition within reach. Everything they could do, they'd done. When the hour was up, Hale didn't give a signal or make a speech. He just nodded, and his men moved. They came in 3 groups. The largest headed straight for the house. A smaller group swung around toward the remains of the barn. The third stayed back with Hale, presumably as reserves. Rhea waited until they were in range of the first trap, a tripwire connected to a shotgun rigged to fire at knee height. The blast caught 2 men, not killing, but taking them out of the fight. The others scattered, looking for cover. Caleb's rifle spoke from below, methodical and precise. A man went down, then another. The attackers returned fire, bullets punching through the walls, shattering windows. Rhea picked her targets carefully, not trying for killing shots, but for disabling ones. Hit a shoulder, hit a leg, make them think twice about advancing. The rifle kicked against her shoulder again and again until her ears rang and the barrel grew hot. The group heading for the barn triggered another trap, a deadfall that dropped a log across their path. One man's horse reared and threw him. The others retreated in confusion. "They're regrouping!" Caleb shouted. Rhea risked a look. The attackers had pulled back out of rifle range, clustering around Hale. She could see him gesturing, giving new orders. "They're going to rush us," Caleb said, "all at once, overwhelm our defenses through sheer numbers." "Can we stop that? We can make them pay for it." The second assault was pure chaos. All 3 groups came at once, firing constantly, laying down enough lead to make accurate shooting nearly impossible. Rhea just pointed and fired, not knowing if she hit anything. Something exploded below, one of Caleb's improvised bombs, kerosene and nails in a jar. Screaming followed. More gunfire, the smell of smoke. A man made it to the porch. Rhea heard Caleb's rifle, then nothing. She didn't know if Caleb had gotten him or if the man had gotten Caleb. "Caleb!" she screamed. "Still here, stay in position." But they were being overrun. Men were breaching the ground floor. Rhea could hear boots on the floorboards below, could hear Caleb's rifle firing faster now, less precise. She abandoned her position and ran for the stairs. Met a man coming up and shot him at point-blank range. The kick nearly knocked her down. The man tumbled backward. Downstairs was hell. 3 men were inside, and Caleb was pinned behind his overturned wheelchair, using it as cover. His rifle was empty, and he'd drawn his pistol. Rhea shot 1 man before he saw her. Missed the second. He turned toward her, and she saw death in his eyes. Then Caleb shot him from the side. The 3rd man ran. They had maybe 10 seconds before the next wave. Caleb was bleeding from somewhere. Rhea couldn't tell where. His face was gray with pain and exertion. "We can't hold," he said. "Too many of them." "Then what?" The sound of more horses interrupted her, but these were coming from a different direction, east toward town. Rhea ran to the window and saw riders cresting the hill, a lot of them, led by Marshal Denton. "It's the law!" she shouted. "Denton's here!" Hale's men saw them too. The assault faltered as confusion spread through the ranks. Some started retreating immediately. Others looked to Hale for orders. Hale sat his horse, staring at the approaching lawmen, his face a mask of calculation. Then he made his decision. He wheeled his horse around and spurted into a gallop, heading for the tree line. "He's running," Caleb said. Several of his men followed. Others threw down their weapons and raised their hands in surrender. Within minutes, the yard was full of federal marshals rounding up prisoners. Denton dismounted and strode toward the house, taking in the carnage. Bodies and blood, and spent brass covering the ground. The house shot to pieces. Rhea and Caleb standing in the doorway, barely able to stand. "You two all right?" he asked. "Define all right," Rhea said. Denton almost smiled. "I was 3 miles out when I heard the shooting. Pushed the horses hard to get here." He looked at the prisoners being lined up. "Looks like I got here just in time." "Hale ran," Caleb said, "north toward the tree line." "He won't get far. I've got men blocking every road out of the territory." Denton pulled out a cigar and lit it. "Between that ledger and the testimony we'll get from these men, Hale's done. So is Judge Whitmore. The whole operation's going to collapse." Rhea felt her legs go weak. She grabbed the doorframe for support. "It's over. The legal part's just starting. But the shooting part? Yeah, that's over." Denton looked at them both seriously. "You understand you'll have to testify. Could take months to sort through all the charges." "We'll be here," Rhea said. After the marshals left with their prisoners, after the wounded were tended and the bodies removed, after the sun set on a day that had felt like it would never end, Rhea and Caleb sat in the ruined kitchen and tried to process what had happened. They'd won. Against all odds, against overwhelming force, against a system designed to crush people like them, they'd won. But victory looked a lot like devastation. The house was barely standing. Their supplies were depleted. The cattle had scattered during the fighting. The work of rebuilding would take years. "What now?" Rhea asked. Caleb looked around at the destruction and started laughing. It was a raw, exhausted sound, but genuine. "Now? Now we do what we've been doing. We rebuild again." "I'm tired, Caleb." "Me too, but we're still breathing, and that's more than a lot of people can say today." He was right. The alternative to rebuilding was quitting, and they'd come too far for that. Over the next weeks, the full extent of Hale's crimes became clear. The ledger led to more ledgers, which led to witnesses willing to talk now that Hale couldn't hurt them. Marshal Denton built a case that stretched back years, encompassing dozens of properties, hundreds of victims. Hale himself was caught trying to cross into Mexico. He was brought back in chains to face trial. Judge Whitmore resigned in disgrace rather than face corruption charges. Several of Hale's key men turned on him in exchange for lighter sentences. The whole empire collapsed like a house built on sand. The town's attitude changed too. Slowly at first, then all at once. Brennan came out to the ranch with supplies and an apology. Others followed. McGregor organized a barn raising, and 20 men showed up to help rebuild. Rhea watched them work and felt something she hadn't felt in months. Not hope exactly. She'd learned that hope was fragile. But something more solid. Something like possibility. Caleb, characteristically, was already planning improvements. The new barn should have better ventilation, and we can reinforce the foundation while we're at it, make it stronger than before. "Everything's stronger than before," Rhea said. "That's the idea." The trial took place in early spring. Rhea and Caleb testified, laying out everything that had happened. The courtroom was packed, people coming from all over the territory to see Victor Hale brought to account. Hale himself sat through it all with the same calculated expression, only breaking once, when Rhea described finding Thomas's watch in Pike's possession. For just a moment, something like regret flickered across his face. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Hale was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. His properties were to be sold, the proceeds going to his victims. Outside the courthouse, Rhea and Caleb stood in the spring sunshine. The air smelled of new growth and possibility. "What do you want to do with the money?" Caleb asked. The settlement from Hale's properties would be substantial. Rebuild the herd, fix the house properly, maybe add another room. Rhea looked at him. "What about you? You could leave now, go anywhere, do anything." Caleb was quiet for a long moment. "I could, but I won't." "Why not?" "Because that ranch is the first place I've belonged since the fall. Maybe the first place I ever really belonged." He met her eyes. "If you'll have me, I'd like to stay." Rhea felt something warm bloom in her chest. Not romance. They were past the age for that kind of foolishness, and their relationship had been forged in fire, not flowers, but partnership, respect. Something deeper than either. "I'd like that," she said. They returned to the ranch together, to land that was theirs now without question or threat. The new barn stood tall and straight, its timbers fresh cut and strong. The cattle were growing healthy on spring grass. The fences were solid. It wasn't the dream Thomas had carried west. His vision had been softer, gentler, built on hope and optimism. What Rhea and Caleb had built was harder, earned through blood and stubbornness and the refusal to break. But it was real, and it was theirs. Years later, people would tell stories about the Dalton Ranch, about the widow and the cripple who fought off an empire, about the siege and the trial and the way everything changed after. Some of the stories were exaggerated. Some got details wrong. That was the nature of stories. But the core truth remained. Two broken people had refused to stay broken. They'd been pushed to the edge and chose to become unbreakable instead. Rhea stood on the porch one evening, watching the sun set over land that had cost everything to keep. Caleb wheeled up beside her, a new carving in his hands, a small wooden horse, perfect in every detail. "For the mantle," he said. She took it, running her fingers over the smooth wood. "It's beautiful. It's a reminder." "Of what?" "That broken things can be made into something better than they were before." He looked at her, and she saw in his eyes the same understanding she felt. "We're not the people we were when this started." "No, we're not." They'd been tested in ways neither could have imagined. They'd done things they never thought themselves capable of, both terrible and necessary. They'd learned that survival wasn't about being the strongest or the smartest. It was about being the most stubborn, about refusing to give ground even when the ground seemed worthless. The ranch would face other challenges. There would be bad winters and dry summers, sick cattle and broken equipment, all the endless struggles that came with working land that didn't want to be worked. But they'd face those challenges together, not as employer and employee, not as widow and hired hand, but as partners who'd earned each other's trust in the only way that mattered, through shared survival. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. In the distance, cattle lowed peacefully. The new barn stood solid against the darkening sky. "We did it," Rhea said quietly. "Yeah," Caleb agreed, "we did." And in that moment, on that porch,